Hi, I'm David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all five names for all the ancestors, and welcome back to the Amplify RJ podcast. I'm going to do things a little bit differently with some of the episodes moving forward. I just came off of a 2-hour conversation with the wonderful Carolyn Sideco, and I'm breaking it into 2 parts for your listening or watching if you're on YouTube experience. Carolyn is someone who came into my orbit in Amplify RJ over the last couple of years. And from her perspective as a youth sports professional, she's taken on this idea of coaching in the youth sports realm and integrating it with Kapwa, which is the Filipino Tagalog word for interconnection and belonging, and has built this out into this whole ecosystem where she is bringing a restorative, interconnection, justice-driven lens to youth sports. And in the second half of our conversation, we're going to talk about how that applies to coaching youth sports. But Carolyn is also someone who I have built a relationship with over the years. And part of what I want to do with this platform is to build a container to just check in with folks. So many of us, especially those of us who are doing justice and equity work, are struggling, or whether we're doing that professionally or doing it in the context of the way that we show up in the world and the multitude of roles we embody. It's been a struggle. And so the first half of our conversation is me catching up with Carolyn about how she's been doing over the last couple of years since we've connected on this platform, what she has been up to as a grandmother, and what embracing Lolahood or elderhood has meant for her in these times as she's continued to work in youth sports, but also move across the country and doing work around Filipino community in New Orleans. That's the first half of this conversation. And then the second part will be about her insights into coaching youth sports. Enjoy. Carolyn, welcome back to the Amplify RJ podcast. You know how we start. I want you to be known by the people who are listening in the way that you want to be known today. Who are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm Carolyn Sideco, founder of Coaching Kapwa, Sports Consultants, and Filipino Identified Person 24/7.
Who are you?
I am a human being trying to be a human being in this world.
Who are you?
I am a grandparent. I am a parent. I am a sister, cousin, daughter.
Who are you?
I'm a monozygote.
Who are you?
I am Maria Carolyn Austria Socorro Sideco Williams.
Who are you?
I am here.
And last for now, who are you?
I'm just a squirrel trying to get a nut in this world.
Man, in so many ways. We don't do explanatory commas often. Can you please unpack the monozygote thing? I know what you mean by that, but for those who don't.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me to explain the song reference.
Oh, no.
A monozygote is a person, part of an identical twin set.
Yes.
So monozygote meaning biologically one egg fertilized by 2 sperm.
Yeah. And I think that helpful and maybe easy way into the first part of this conversation, which is like, it's been a while since we've caught up in these times. A lot has happened. You've been on Netflix as part of a twin study about plant-based eating. But I mean, you can share about that, but how are you to the extent that you can answer a question about the last 2 years? What have you been up to?
In the last 2 years, I've been up to a lot of changes, a lot of things, a lot of very concrete things have happened in my life, but I'm still that same person 2 years ago, slightly evolved with new things to talk about.
Yeah. What, can you name some of those concrete things that
Those
feel
concrete
important to this
things.
conversation today?
Yeah. Well, one is the Netflix show. You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment that came out in January of 2024.
Hmm.
2024. So it's about a year and a half old. And I don't I don't know if it's still streaming on Netflix, but you could find it uh, on Netflix, I think still.
Yeah, definitely. Other concrete things. I don't know that you were a Lola the last time that we talked.
I became a Lola, a grandmother, in November of
That
2022.
that's a new role in the world. How are you 3
Right.
years almost into it?
I am still navigating like what she's going to call me, what my grandbaby's going to call me. So right now I'm going by Lola,
Mhm.
but in our extended family we have lots of Lolas. I'm living into my direct Lola lineage. I'm also I'm happy that I am a Lola. I love being a Lola. I love being considered a Lola, but also not just with an actual grandchild in my lineage, but also societally. I'm living into my over 55 era. So in some circles, I'm considered an elder, a senior citizen, which affords it some sorts of discounts here and there, and considerations for things that I enjoy. But also, it has shifted a little bit of my own perception of myself in this way, and my responsibility to the broader community in what
Yeah.
voice and what experience I bring.
With all the experience you've amassed and all the relationships that you have in community, how are you holding yourself, or how is your community holding you as an elder? What does that look like?
Mm. It feels lovely. Right now, it feels spacious and lovely and energetic. And since we last talked, my family and I bought a house in New Orleans as a social impact project. So I now live in both New Orleans and in San Francisco. In New Orleans, I do my day to day looks like Filipino community development work.
Hmm.
I literally, I know this is a little aloof of me, maybe to say, but literally, I walk around New Orleans every day and meet people. I learn a lot about Filipino American communities there. I learn about the long history of Filipinos there in that area. And we're developing tours to help people feel supported as they too learn about the history of Filipinos in New Orleans, which is a very long history that I didn't know of until a number of years ago.
Yeah. When you say people, like New Orleans locals, New Orleans local Filipinos, Filipinos coming in from everywhere, or white people trying to be more woke?
All of that, not so much the white people trying to be woke, not so much because sometimes they think they already know it. So
Hmm.
but yeah, even some of that, all of those populations, but mainly we do center residents, Filipino American, Filipino Louisianan residents of that region. And since we now know that Filipinos, people from the Philippine Islands, mostly men, were the first Asian identified settlers in that region. And so, with that long history, now that's acknowledged by historical markers there in that area. When people find out about that, they say stuff like I did, like I didn't know about this, or oh my
Hmm.
gosh, we didn't learn this, or what does this look like, and where are the Filipinos now in the area? And so we like to answer those sorts of questions.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think of New Orleans as a place where Filipinos are in the country. Definitely Southern California, definitely the Bay, definitely, Seattle, and, there are East Coast pockets as well, and Midwest pockets, I assume. I knew the Chicago Filipinos once I got there, right? But I don't think about the South very much at all. What have you found over the last couple of years?
We found that Filipinos came over on Manila galleon ships and
Mm-hmm.
settled in the bayous. One of the most famous, the first one was called Saint Malo settlement in an area about half hour away from the city of New Orleans. And then there's another settlement that was called Manila Village, which is in the opposite direction, another half hour, 45 minutes away. So there are two historical markers now that were unveiled, I believe, in 2012 and then 2019. And so that's when more exposure, more knowledge of it came about. You can find a lot of this information now readily available on the internet. And that's what we are discovering as residents there now and working in Filipino community development now there, is that as people are knowing this knowledge, there hasn't been any tours, there hasn't been any like local sort of like, yeah, when people ask where are the Filipinos now, it kind of like just went off into the into the universe and just settled there. So we now are doing tours for community members who are asking those questions. It's our group is called the Bayou Barkada. So Barkada is a Filipino word for friend group, and then of course the Bayou refers to the region. So you can find us on Instagram, and we don't do any other marketing because we literally just like to hang out with one another. But we do like to offer a welcoming sort of Bayanihan hospitality spirit
Mm-hmm.
to the region for people who literally are trying to find if they have connections to that long history. A lot of people do. They'll say, oh, I just found out that my grandparents or my ancestors came through the South, and I'm wondering if they were here. And we have historical places where Filipinos have been, have had organizations, have had businesses, and they're still there. There are direct descendants of those earliest folks that settled in the bayous, and they're still there. And we want to acknowledge their presence and the fact that we have this connection. We have this connection with them.
So to timestamp this conversation, it's the end of AAPI, NHD, if you want to throw a DA
Let's do
in there,
it. Yes.
right? Heritage Month. And I struggle with all of that a lot because I do appreciate the representation. Like, representation does matter. Representation doesn't mean everything. And there are lots of conversations to be had about grouping Asians, broadly Pacific Islanders, Desi, Native Hawaiians, like all together in this time where it's like, okay, all you foreigners over there, right? From like that half of the world, basically, or that third of the world, basically, who happen to be in America. But one of the things that I have thought a lot about, specifically as a Filipino, but as an immigrant as a whole, like what it means to be a diasporic person, right? Whether by choice, or by force, depending on how you view U.S. imperialism impacting the way that people came over here from the Philippines specifically, or Spanish colonialism before that. Uh, but how have you been reckoning with that idea in this time, diasporic versus like Filipino American or Asian American?
That is a great question. And I wrestle with that every day. The way that I know to approach it comes from, I believe, my cultural upbringing and the
Mm.
cultural ecosystem that comes from identifying from a population of people who are in a collective society, right? And by that I mean relational. So the various ways that I relate to people and to populations, groups of people, that involves an intimacy and a proximity that I take solace in that, because if I always stay in this very broad and wide diasporic lens, then I can't tend to the interpersonal connections that ground me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when I think about AA, NH, DPI, when I think about this month, and I think about how, like you said, it's been relegated to these days, I always want to, my mantra during this month is, I am this all the other months as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm this every day. And it has real effects for how we ourselves put ourselves out in the world, I think. And so I do ask a lot of questions when it comes to May of people and have a deeper sort of regard, I think, because we are diasporic and people will just go all out and celebrate every day and be on every single panel and be representation and all that kind of stuff. And personally, I'm kind of past that. I'm kind of like, let's have a conversation June 1st or some random day in like October, you know.
October's our history month. So yeah.
Those conversations around to like, you know, how can we ask the next question? How can we get the next phase? And I understand representation is cool. I'm not against representation, but I need more personally.
Yeah. I see that big representation energy from people specifically around celebration times and heritage times and all these things. Like, I can appreciate that. This last Mother's Day, I failed to live up to expectations for my wife. And like one of the things that we were talking about in our debrief from that, in the ways that like I'd fallen short of her expectations and like not making the day feel special. She's like, yes, of course, like I want to be appreciated every day and all these things. Like as Asian people, as Filipino people, like it's important for us to be ourselves and be welcome in the spaces that we inhabit every day. And because life is the way that it is, like that's not always possible. And like this might not be a one-to-one connection, right? Within the rhythm of the life of two working parents with very young children, like battling sickness, daycare breaks, having to work late, trying to be a part of a community and all of these things, it's a struggle for us, both of us, to make each other feel special on day to day. And so Mother's Day matters that much more, right? Father's Day, I'm not like much of a celebrator, and like it's still nice to be acknowledged in that way, and it doesn't stop there. So like asking the next question is important. And so like the connection that I'm making though is when you're so in the hustle of the day to day, right? As you introduce yourself, like a squirrel just trying to get their nut, right? Just trying to make sure that like you're fed, housed, and you and your family and those you decide to care for and be your community are good. Like it's hard for people to ask the next question, right? How do you create space for yourself to ask the next question when it comes to like issues of the diaspora, or like what to do in the political hellscape that we're living in?
I will answer that this way. I try to shift assumptions or different starting point, right? I will take Filipino Americans, right? If we signal to one another, right, whether we wear our gear or we
Or like tattoos out, or
there you
right?
go,
Yeah.
right? Philippine sun everywhere,
Yeah.
right? And if we drop hints like lapu-lapu, Filipino pride, those signals are out there. And if we are attuning to that frequency, if we are getting that in our algorithms, if we are kind of getting that if we are training our algorithms to face that way, I think for me, that's how I keep those connections alive, to affirm myself in terms of me feeling cared for in the broader community, that I don't have to wear the Philippine flag to be regarded as a person, that I know when I do have to wear it, I'm very cognizant of the spaces where I will explain that as well. I am intentionally signaling that I have to be regarded. And I'm at a point in my life, maybe this is as I get older, I am much more self-assured. And I think my own confidence and self-assuredness really helps me have patience with people in May, especially asking me to transact my identity, right? And what that means for us when we say, oh my gosh, this month, how does it feel? How does it weigh on people when we have the choice to, when we know we have the choice and how we want to represent ourselves and in community, right? Like I'm at a point where I could say, no, I don't want to, talk to someone else. There are lots of Filipinos you could talk to about that.
Mhm.
This is what I want to take up space with, right? So being
Yeah.
able to direct that and being able to have that self-assuredness in my identity, because I've done deep work in my identity excavation, my relationship with myself, my relationship, my positionality as it changes in broader community. And it's a skill to be able to read the room. It's a skill to be able to consider oneself and not ghost myself. I've had to train myself not to ghost myself and to regard myself. And that what I want for the community is the same thing that I want for myself and my family.
Can you clarify ghost yourself?
Like when I don't regard myself, when I
I guess
say
what part of yourself?
all parts of myself, my
Yeah, okay.
needs, right?
Mhm.
My needs. I have to sacrifice my own needs when I was raising my children. I have to sacrifice my needs when my parents now have needs. And how do I regard myself when I'm caregiving? When I'm offering myself, how am I regarding myself? Am I thinking that I'm selfish because I'm going to order for dinner what I want instead of asking everyone else what they want? And does that mean I'm selfish? No, it just means that like I want something and I'm still thinking of other people, but I'm not ghosting myself. And so that's a very simplistic example. But how do we not subjugate ourselves even in the service of the expectation of our role in community? How do I meet my needs and the needs of my family, my broader community, in a way that fortifies those relationships,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah, what I think of, go ahead.
no, what we had talked about this before in terms of professionally, what that could look like is like burnout. What that could look like is this feeling of an unfair transaction of
Mhm.
harms that could happen, that will inevitably happen when people are with one another. So how do we acknowledge that and not have this perception that we're selfish in asking for that clarity, in asking for a practice of repair and addressing harms?
Yeah. And when I think about the balance of individual needs and Kapwa, right? Um, we are individuals with needs as a part of a community,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And while it is ideal that we are in community with people who are looking out for our needs and will stop us and like ask for those things, like we don't always move in those spaces, especially as people um, who are doing service work in some way, shape, or form. And then like I don't get to step in these shoes, but like as a woman doing service work in some way, shape, or form, how do you balance the idea of like selfishness? And maybe you're not calling it selfishness, but what some might see as selfishness with like, no, I'm doing this so I can be of best service to our community.
How do I balance that?
Maybe
I
balance isn't the
ask.
right word.
I just I have to ask people. I I have to ask even my 2.5-year-old granddaughter. Like, I have to ask her questions. Like this morning, the question was like, can I, do you need for my voice to be softer? When I'm being very direct with her. Like, will you change your diaper? Will you let me change your diaper if my voice is softer? Like, what's it gonna take? So, like, those practical things, but always, and I know this is an emotional lift. An emotional lift is how to make what we usually assume into something that we don't assume. How do we regard each other and say and hold these truths when we ask for them? When you ask me multiple times, who am I? Right? If I were to say to you, you know, David, I just don't have the capacity to think of who I am for that long, for that
Hmm.
many times, right? I know of all people, David, you have the capacity to hold that,
Hmm.
right? Um, and that tells me that I don't have to ghost myself. The fact that I know that you can hold that. And that's done by the conversations we've had, and the work that we've done together and in these spaces. So that's the relational part that I want to make a little bit more visible to folks. And I know it's kind of counterintuitive. The counterintuitive part is like the not knowing and being okay with the not knowing, because
Hmm.
and not knowing yourself. But for people who have been trying to find themselves for their lifetime, it's not weird for us, because we've been trying to find ourselves, and we've been on an identity relational journey for a long time.
Going back to the "who are you" thing, I did clock that you were like, I'm tapping out," and you didn't say anything. If you had, like,
Yeah,
in that moment, I would've I don't think I would've been like, "Okay, we're good." Like, I would've been like, "It's okay, but this is our tradition. Take the time that
right.
you need. Like, there's no pressure on it." But you pushed through. You didn't advocate for yourself, even though, like, I was seeing it happen in the moment. Like,
I
your last 2
advocated, I advocated for myself in the way that I'm like, okay, I'm just going to play with this, right?
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just going to play with this. Like, I know, we're still going to run the play, David. We're still going to
Gotcha,
run the
okay.
play, right? We're not going to give up on the play. We're going to see it through, right? And I love that. I love that. I love that we can do that. And I know I had space for that
Gotcha,
with
okay.
you, right? I
Yeah,
know I didn't
okay.
have to bring like 7 times, like, dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Nope. I'm going to come up for air and I'm going to say, bam, and
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, also as an invitation for people who do this exercise with me in the future, say less things earlier on so you don't have to stretch yourself so late. And like when you do get to that point, hey, like it's totally okay to play, right? And the squirrel to get the nut, I'm a squirrel trying to get the nut part, like the things that come out of play are fuel for the rest of the conversation. And we're just meeting each other where we're at with all the intersections of what you were doing right before you came onto this, and what I was doing right before I came onto this. And this space in particular is a space of play for me as I'm trying to do content in a way that is helping really just trying to help people feel seen in like everything that we're navigating.
Yeah.
And I know this isn't going to be like universally applicable and viral, but like for those of you who have made it this far into this conversation, I hope some of it has been helpful in some way, shape, or form. As we've really casually caught up about some of the things that you've been uh, up to, specifically in New Orleans, which is new and exciting. And of course, those things will be linked in the show notes or description. Description if you're watching it on YouTube, show notes if this is a podcast audio only experience for you. But what I wanted to ask about, you know, this time and define this time as maybe this calendar year, the last couple of months, the last couple of weeks. What is something that has given you hope and or joy?
What's given me hope and joy is really these past few months is in the spaces that I navigate in, is literally a doubling down on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's an adherence and an affirmation that since the election and even before the election, when so many people saw, we're starting to translate what's going on, when organizations, especially thought leaders in organizations, in groups of folks that I trust, were saying we really need to talk to one another and take care of one another. How are we going to do that? Having these conversations about mutual aid, especially, even more so, having these conversations about who is it that we are forgetting, or that we are not considering, and really doubling down on looking again how equity has to evolve for the good of the people, how diversity, since it's now being weaponized against people all over the world, and even in our country. Not that it wasn't before, but it feels different this time. It feels so different this time that people I know and people are afraid to be American. People are afraid to identify as that. People won't leave the country for fear of not being able to come back to their
Yeah.
families that are here. There's um, a real visceral um, difference for me this calendar year and these times. And now that I also live in New Orleans, where Louisiana is, I think, the state with the most detention centers, working on that front, how can I not acknowledge that while I'm trying to do Filipino community development with groups of Filipinos, where our collective history is involves a lot of exploitation and a lot of hiding and a lot of ways that we've had to be in the shadows for fear of uh, exploitation. Um, so those are the things that I'm contending with, in a way that also gives me hope that I am now in spaces um, that are that are really saying overtly that we're going to shift where we put our resources. We're not going to remove equity uh, from our purpose, from our mission. So those are the spaces that I want to kind of find myself in and breathe in, because I refuse to watch the news for more than half hour a day.
Yeah. I asked a question about hope and joy, and my body was feeling heaviness through your response. And I don't know that I was like, I didn't explicitly put an expectation out there to be like, make me feel good, make me feel better, tell me what's hopeful and joyful for you. And I like, if I'm watching my body's reaction, like, I think like that's what was going on, because I agree, like, in many ways, like, yes, we're doubling down on all our work. Like, my work, like, actually hasn't changed. Like, nothing about what I do about like restorative justice through a lens of anti-racism, abolition, decolonization, helping people build and strengthen relationships rooted in equity and trust, and repair relationships when harm occurs, like, that has not changed. That's more relevant than ever. And of course, I'm still doing that. Who's buying that, who's paying for that on an institutional level is drastically like fewer people. And there are moments of joy and hope when I still get to meet in community with people who are trying to do these things. And um, I'm glad that's like a hopeful and joyful experience for you. And when I heard that, it was just like, yeah, but like we're struggling against so
Yeah,
much.
right. And I don't want to. Well, I guess part of that is some sort of coping
Mhm.
mechanism for me, right? Some
Yeah.
sort of disassociation, some sort of uh, way that I've been, I've learned. I've learned as an immigrant. I've learned as uh, a woman, basically in a male dominated world and culture, and professionally as someone in athletics. Uh, I'm used to this kind of tussling. I'm used to I don't like to debate. I don't like to
Mhm.
debate. I don't like to, get in yelling matches or that doesn't give me joy or any sort of any sort of good energy, to be honest. But I do like wrestling with with what then how do I define joy? How do I define what does it mean and what does it look like for me? And and how do I meet that in other people? Um, and if I know a lot of times I represent actually this this privilege of being able to, oh, I don't have to pay attention to the news as much as
Mhm.
maybe other people, or I can direct, or I can spend time to deeply look into organizations that are like not kind of like, straight up, or the ones that are flinching, the ones that are, I have capacity in my day to critique that and analyze that. And that in and of itself is, I understand, as a privilege, but that also replaces, it gives me my own sense of agency, that I have
Mhm.
control in how I wrestle with the daily news. Like, am I keeping up with executive orders? Probably not. But I'm keeping up with organizations, and I'm keeping up with the spaces that I advocate in, and how these executive orders are either impacting them, or they're strategizing to deal with it. So it's it is a direct way of acknowledging the current situation, multiple situations. But I like to do that relationally with people that have proximity to that than with um, the broader sort of national news. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can't affect national news. Like
Right.
Carolyn and David are not going to affect national news. We can affect our sphere of influences, and so
Correct. Yes.
that's always helpful. And I think like being informed about what's happening in the world and in the country as a whole is helpful to a point, but there's only so much information that you can intake before you're just
Well, even
consuming it to.
specifically like interventions, right? Like interventions, like my parents, both my parents are in their 80s.
Mhm.
And if I didn't intervene, or if, I or my other siblings or any of our family members didn't intervene and say, "Hey, let's go to the park. Hey, let's go out. Let's spend some time together." If we didn't do that intentionally, they literally would be in front of the TV screen watching the news all day.
Mm.
And already, when I do spend time with them, that's all they talk about is
Mm.
what they see in the news, and they're worried and they're scared. And I feel that there's there's a way that they're all still wrestling with the fact that that we in our family have an immigrant lens on this, and they've come to a place and they're still reconciling why they came here and how they're here. And if I can't interrupt that and bring them to Golden Gate Park, and to bring them to the ocean, and to bring them to the MLK um, memorial structure, if I can't do this with them and interrupt this whole thing that's happening with them, then they have to hold all that, right? So that's it's not even I don't even think of it like in terms of affecting change, but really um, having that impact in the here and now, right? And my parents, like I said, they're in their 80s, and they're still telling their friends about social justice issues, and they're still trying to convince people about the change that we need in our society, because all of their children work in these activist spaces and they love us and they feel responsible for that. And so how do we hold their experience? How do we have regard for our elders, the elders of the elders, right? Who for their lifetimes have been examples to us of being in this world and in this context, right? So that's that's a real kind of explanation, but it has like concrete impacts on how I organize my day, what I put in what I put importance on, and how I organize the way I'm facing directionally, um, and with intention. Ta-da!
Yeah. Can you talk about the logistics of a day and what like putting importance and time into certain things look like? Because like what it was occurring to me earlier in our conversation about like, it's one thing to advocate for your needs or stand up for your needs when it's like ordering food, versus like, or like when it's like, oh, I'm just gonna like playfully answer these last questions. It's another thing to think about those things proactively when you are constructing, what am I gonna do today?
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
does that look like?
For me, when I wake up in the morning, I always ask, "What is Spirit up to today?" That's my question. So that's uh, always acknowledging um, spirit, spirituality, how I believe in spirit guides. Um, Sometimes I consider that God. I think generally God, spirit, humanity, and how is that directing me today? Um, that's how I start my day. That's the first question I ask. Give gratitude. Always give gratitude for the fact that I woke up. Uh, and then it's usually the night before, or the week before. I literally put down on paper on my calendar how I want to face that day. Right. So um, for today, for instance, in preparing for our conversation today, how do I want to feel? And so that's how I prepared yesterday, right? And I thought I put enough spaciousness this morning until until my granddaughter had other ideas, right? Um, and we playfully call that sabotage, right? And by that I mean approaching the way that life happens, and it's real and it's regular, and it's not meant to like, you know, sabotage me and my life and who I am, but it's just meant for me to regard, right? So I do set up my day knowing that, you know what, she needs this time, or if I'm on Lola duty this week, then she's the priority. Then I calendar and I plan around the fact that my energy is primarily um, in response to her needs. And that's usually how I plan my day. Like, what are people asking of me that I care about? What are my personal responsibilities? And then I always plan my nap. So, or my downtime. Sometimes it looks like a nap. Sometimes it literally is spaciousness to write or to stare out, take a long commute around the coast or something like that. But that is weighed in the same um, importance as uh, someone asking for a half hour conversation or something like that, right? For a check in, I like to combine those things, right? Like, oh, can we do a check in as we're walking along the beach, or oh, can we do a check in as we're shopping groceries? I don't know, whatever that is, whatever feels good for that person. Um, that's the main question I ask after my gratitude, after what spirit up to today, and how does my spirit get filled, and how can I pour into others? Um, to use that analogy, right? Even if it's who am I going to spend half hour texting this morning? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that those of you who are listening to this casual version of this conversation were able to glean the wisdom, the gentleness, the I'm not going to call it life advice. There has to be something else that like goes deeper to advice, but a word escaping me. That our Lola gave us. And now we're going to jump into the more professional side of what her brilliance is. In for you, another episode, but for me, in this next moment of the conversation.